The city that never sleeps was Jake's playground. The bustling streets, the towering skyscrapers, and the endless sea of lights created a mesmerizing backdrop for his nocturnal adventures. A programmer by day, a night owl by nature, he thrived in the electric hum of New York City after dark. The neon signs, the distant chatter, and the occasional honk of a taxi were the symphony to which he coded. His apartment, a small studio in Greenwich Village, was his sanctuary. It was a cozy haven filled with books, gadgets, and the soft glow of his computer screen. Lines of code filled his computer screen, his fingers dancing across the keyboard. Each keystroke was a step closer to solving the puzzle that lay before him. One Friday night, Jake found himself wrestling with a particularly stubborn piece of code. The problem seemed insurmountable, but he was determined to crack it. Hours melted away. The only sounds were the click-clack of his keyboard and the distant sirens echoing through the concrete jungle. The city outside was alive, yet his focus was unwavering. He glanced at the clock. 3 a.m. Time had slipped through his fingers like sand, unnoticed in the intensity of his work. Exhaustion tugged at him, but the code was a puzzle demanding to be solved. His eyes burned from the screen's glare, yet he couldn't tear himself away. Jake decided to grab a coffee from the all-night bodega downstairs. The promise of caffeine and a brief respite was too tempting to resist. A breath of fresh air and a dose of caffeine were just what he needed. The cool night air was invigorating, a stark contrast to the warm, stuffy apartment. As he stepped out of his apartment building, the cool night air hit him. It was refreshing, a reminder that there was a world beyond his screen. The streets were nearly deserted, the usual cacophony replaced by an unsettling quiet. It was a different side of New York, one that few got to see. It was then that he noticed the flyer taped to a lamppost, a vintage electronics flea market happening the next day. His curiosity was piqued. Perhaps a visit would provide the inspiration he needed. The next day, Jake found himself drawn to the flea market. He enjoyed the nostalgia of old gadgets, relics of a bygone era. Rows of dusty electronics greeted him, rotary phones, record players, and then he saw it. Lying forgotten on a table, dwarfed by a hulking boombox, was a Motorola Dynatac 8000X, the world's first commercial cell phone. The phone was a behemoth, a brick with an antenna. It was a far cry from the sleek smartphones in everyone's pockets.
A classic, that one. Don't see many of those around anymore.
Jake couldn't resist. He purchased the phone, more as a novelty than anything else. He didn't even know if it worked. Back in his apartment, he plugged it into an old adapter, surprised to see the red LED light flicker to life. Later that night, Jake was back at his computer, the Dynatac lying forgotten on his desk. Suddenly, a shrill ring pierced the air. He jumped, startled. The sound was coming from the Dynatac. Who could be calling on that ancient thing? Hesitantly, he picked up the phone.
Hello? Jake? You need to leave the city. There's going to be a disaster. Get out while you can.
The voice was urgent, panicked. Jake frowned. Jake, narrator. Who is this? He demanded, but the line went dead. He stared at the phone in his hand, his heart pounding. It had to be a prank, a cruel joke. He dismissed it as some kids messing around. But the call lingered in Jake's mind, echoing in the silence of his apartment. He couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that had settled deep within him. He tried to convince himself it was nothing, just a prank or a wrong number, but the voice's urgency had been too real, too pressing to ignore. Determined to find some clarity, he decided to look into the phone's history, hoping to find a rational explanation that would put his mind at ease. He spent hours researching online, scouring through forums, archives, and any digital footprint that might lead to an answer. His efforts led him to discover that the phone's previous owner was a man named Arthur Maddox, a reclusive figure who had mysteriously disappeared years ago. Some whispered that Maddox had been working on a secret project, something so groundbreaking and dangerous that it bordered on the fantastical, time manipulation. Jake stumbled upon an old news article about Maddox's disappearance, detailing the strange circumstances surrounding it. The article mentioned a peculiar device found in Maddox's apartment, a device that authorities couldn't identify and had since been lost to time. Could it be the phone? Was this ordinary-looking device the key to Maddox's enigmatic project? The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they painted was too bizarre, too surreal to comprehend. Jake felt like he was on the brink of uncovering something monumental, yet terrifying. Days turned into a blur of anxiety and anticipation. Jake couldn't focus on his work, the impending doom from the phone call looming over him. He started noticing things, subtle changes in his surroundings. People seemed more on edge, the city's usual vibrancy replaced by a palpable tension. Then it happened. On a Wednesday evening, just as the city was bathed in the golden hues of sunset, the phone rang again.
Jake, it's happening. Get out now. The bridge, it's going to...
The line cut off abruptly. Jake's heart hammered in his chest. He didn't know what to believe, but the fear in the voice was undeniable. His instincts screamed at him to run. He grabbed a backpack, stuffing it with essentials, and fled his apartment. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he had to get out of the city. He hailed a cab, his voice trembling as he gave the address of a friend's place upstate. As they sped away, he glanced back at the city skyline, his heart pounding in his ears. He spent the next few days glued to the news, his blood running cold as he watched reports of a massive structural failure on the Brooklyn Bridge. The bridge had partially collapsed, the damage catastrophic. The death toll was still rising. Jake was safe, but the city he called home was reeling. He couldn't shake off the chilling feeling that the phone call had saved his life. He had escaped a disaster, but the mystery of the caller and the phone deepened. When he finally returned to his apartment, the phone was gone. He searched everywhere, but it had vanished without a trace. Had someone taken it? Or had it disappeared as mysteriously as it had appeared? He had no answers. Life slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after the events of the past week. The bridge collapse became a distant memory, a scar on the city's landscape. Jake threw himself back into his work, trying to forget the chilling calls and the phone that had haunted him. But some things are not easily forgotten. The experience had changed him. He was more aware, more attuned to the subtle rhythms of the city. He couldn't shake off the feeling that he was being watched, that the mystery of the phone was far from over. One evening, months later, Jake received a package. Inside, nestled in protective foam, was the Dynatac, the very same phone he thought he had left behind forever. The sight of it sent a shiver down his spine, a relic from a past he wished to forget. His blood ran cold. He hadn't seen the phone since that night, and yet here it was, back in his life, as if it had never left. The memories of that fateful evening came rushing back, flooding his mind with a mix of fear and curiosity. He hesitated for a moment, then picked up the phone. It felt cold in his hand, like a piece of ice, sending a chill through his body. He could almost hear the echoes of the past, whispering through the silence of the room. He brought it to his ear, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. The anticipation was almost unbearable, each second stretching into an eternity.
Silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, almost tangible, pressing down on him from all sides.
He was about to put it down when he heard a faint click on the other end. Then a voice, barely a whisper, but unmistakable, the raspy voice of his mysterious caller. It was a sound that had haunted his dreams, now breaking the silence of his reality.
You can't escape the future, Jake. It's coming for us all. The words hung in the air, heavy with foreboding, as if they carried the weight of an inevitable fate.
The line went dead. The phone felt heavy in his hand, a chilling reminder of the mysteries that lay hidden beneath the surface of the everyday world. Jake stood there, frozen, the echoes of the past and the whispers of the future intertwining in the stillness of the night. Jake's blood ran cold. His grip tightened on the phone, his knuckles turning white. He had to know who was behind this. He had to know how this was possible. He needed answers. He quickly dialed the number from his call log, the only number associated with the phone. It rang once, twice, then picked up.
Hello?
The voice on the other end was familiar but younger, filled with a nervous energy. It was his own voice. The phone slipped from Jake's grasp, clattering to the floor. He stared at it, his mind reeling. He had just received a call from himself, a call from the past, a call that had saved his life. But how? Why? The answers, it seemed, were lost in the labyrinth of time itself.